He's given me a timer, but if somebody else will time me, because I like to wander a little bit when I'm talking, it's hard for me to stand in one place. Let me tell you a little bit about me, so you kind of get the flavor of who I am. When I was 5 years old, my mother was very, very musical. She wanted all of her kids to be musical, and so I was assigned to take piano lessons. And all I had to do was play one song a day, and it would take me 4 hours sitting there to play that one song, you know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. I'm very stubborn. So I've had to learn a lot of things the hard way. And my dad used to say, Quin, you need to learn from other people's mistakes. You're not going to live long enough to make them all yourself. But you're sure giving it a college try. And that is the case. You know, I have a tendency to make my own mistakes. And I've learned from those mistakes. I can tell you a lot of ways how not to do things. I started my first business at 14. But I want to start telling you a little bit about my story before that. When I was in 4th grade, I could not read. And my parents were very bright. There was no reason I shouldn't be reading. My teachers were supposed to be great teachers, and there was no reason I shouldn't be reading. And so they called in a psychologist to see what my problem was. And so he worked with me for a little while, and he finally came up and he said, if you'll read this one little book, it's like one of the Dick and Jane books, you know, See Spot Run or one of those. He said, if you'll read that, I'll take you bowling during school. Well, that sounded kind of cool. So I read that book, and I went bowling during school. Well, a week later he came and he said, now if you'll read this book, I'll take you swimming during school. Well, my dad was a swimmer. We swam every week. There was no incentive there at all. So I never read another book in 4th grade. Here's how bad it was. My teacher, when we were reading out loud, and she would be going down the row, and she'd come to me, and she'd go, oh, sorry, Quin, you're too stupid to read. Well, that made me want to read. I was really excited about reading after 4th grade. My dad and mother, they took some responsibility. They wanted to help me learn how to read. So my dad started reading a book, The Black Stallion by Walter Farley. Now, he got about halfway through that book, and for those of you that have read that book, he got to the part where Alex and the Black are stranded on a deserted island, and he quit reading. What happened? I wanted to know. And I kept bugging my dad, when are you going to finish reading? Oh, son, I'm just so busy. And so he left me hanging. And finally, after a period of time, I finally picked that book up and I started to read it because I wanted to find out what happened to Alex and the Black. I finished that book during the summer. In 5th grade, they had a reading contest at my school. They wanted us to record the number of pages we read during the school year. I think the 2nd place was somewhere around 12,000 pages. I smoked everybody at 56,000 pages. So I went from not reading in 4th grade to out-reading everybody else in 5th grade. And in 6th grade, I did it again. I had 97,000 pages. There was a difference, you know, and I didn't understand what happened back then, but now looking back on it, I can learn from that. The difference was I chose to do it. When I made the choice, I exploded. In story after story, I can show you how students, when they make the choice, they will explode. Now, some of the history that I feel like I should tell you. My mother passed away when I was 15. I'm the oldest of 8 children. And my mom had been a psychologist, very well educated. She had taught at the college level for a number of different colleges. And she was seeing problems in our education system. And she had been talking, before she passed away, about doing something like homeschool. Well, back in the 70s, that was like the curse. You know, if you did homeschool, it was like Frankenstein. And my dad, being a little bit of a maverick too, when my mother passed away, it was the beginning, it was actually just before the school year started. And I turned 16 several weeks after that. And so he kept us home from school, and we decided, or he decided, I should say, that we were going to do homeschool. Immediately, we were served papers by the school district, and we were taken to court. So for the next 3 months, my homeschool experience consisted of two things. One, I could get up at whatever time I wanted to in the morning. I could read out of the Encyclopedia Britannica, World Books. We had the World Books then. So I could read out of there for 1 hour, and then I could do whatever I wanted the rest of the day. So I did that, and I'd go fishing or hunting, or I would play the rest of the day while all my buddies were in school. So I could see why the school district was a little bit upset, because all they could see is that we were out hunting, because I was up at 6 in the morning, I'd read, and I'd be ready to go. You know, go catch the birds out on the river or whatever I could do, and with my little brother, and so we were having a great time. Well, that was the first thing that we had to do. The second thing we had to do was 2 to 3 days a week during that period of time, we were taken to the law library with our attorney. I was assigned to research our public education system. That was kind of a daunting task for a 16-year-old. So I had a lot of direction from our attorney. He pointed things out to me, so I started to research our education system. I started with Horace Mann. Horace Mann, for many of you that might know, you know, he came around in about the 1830s, and he had this very progressive agenda. He wanted to force kids to go to a public school. And they actually did for a short period of time at gunpoint. It didn't work very well. People weren't very happy about doing that. In the 1850s, Horace Mann passed away, and that was kind of just left hanging. Along about 1890, John Dewey came along. John Dewey had studied Horace Mann. He picked up where Horace Mann left off. John Dewey did some things differently. He decided he wanted to create an organization that helped him to do this. So he put a group together that they were all professors, so they all had some clout, and they started doing some things to make changes in our education system. Some of the things that I remember that I studied were he wanted to create a system to manage society with. That's what he called our public education system. Everything else that he did was set up to be able to accomplish that. There were a number of things that as I was studying this, preparing for court, that really intrigued me. One of those things was he wanted God out of the public school system. Without God in the school system, the students didn't have a higher power to turn to. They would turn to the teacher. He wanted the teacher to be the number one authority in the school system, so that all of the students would turn to the teacher. Now, in order to accomplish that, he also had to get into the home and move the parent authority away from the students and convert that to the teacher. And so in one of the documents that I read back then, they wanted to initiate mandatory homework. Well, mandatory homework was not a very popular thing to initiate, and so they didn't push that very hard. They started making suggestions about homework, and they started to boil the frog slowly, so to speak. And what they would do with homework is they would just introduce a little bit at a time until finally they were able to introduce mandatory homework and be able to take away from the parents' time with their students. Now, they knew that if they didn't do one other step with the homework, that the parents could still be the authority. And so approximately every 10 years, they wanted to change the curriculum. By changing the curriculum so the parents can't help the students, that makes the teacher the authority. Now, after school, who becomes the authority? It's not the teacher anymore, it's the government. So it's part of that system to manage with. So they wanted to create a centralized authority figure. Now, I remember when we went to court, and it was I was called on to come up and speak by our attorney, and he asked a few questions about what I'd been studying and how I'd been studying the history of education. And the prosecuting attorney jumped up there and started trying to drill me on all these questions. And I'll never forget having him start yelling at me in the courtroom. Here I was, 16 years old. I thought I had the world by the tail because this guy was yelling at me and smoke was coming out of his ears. And the judge stopped him and said, "One more word and I'm going to give you a contempt of court." And I was just up there, I thought I was the coolest guy because I had that much control over this prosecuting attorney. Now, my dad, because of the situation, had enrolled us back into school the day before our court case actually started. And he did that based on the advice of our attorney because we had no clue how the court was going to look at what we were doing. At that period of time, you may or may not remember the Adam Swap and John Singer. They were having that catastrophe that was in the news at the time. We didn't want to go through something like that. And so we all went back to school. Now, shortly after that, we moved from Idaho, where this happened, down to Salt Lake. And because of that 3-month period of time I was out of public school, they wanted to hold me back. Now, looking back on it, because back then, I have to tell you, my sole goal in life was to become a professional basketball player. That's all I wanted to do. So 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, that's what I did. If it didn't have a basketball, I didn't do it. I didn't even date until I was a senior in high school because it didn't include a basketball. And so, I was pretty hooked on basketball. Well, when we came down to Salt Lake, they wanted to hold me back, which I didn't want to do. So I looked at some private schools and I called a private school up. And as soon as they found out I liked to play basketball and I was good at it, they wouldn't stop calling us until I agreed to come to that school. So they scholarshiped my whole family so I'd come to that school. So my whole family, we all went to this private school together, and so it began a different experience because I got to see what private school was like versus public school versus homeschool. By far, the things that I learned the most were what I learned at homeschool. They were the things that I learned that I used in my business. Now, I had a business at 14, and I always kept that business going. Well, I shouldn't say kept that one going because I kept it going for a little while, then I started another one, then another one. I had probably, by the time I graduated from high school, I probably had 6 different businesses, and I'd employed people, and I learned the value of other people working for me. I learned I could do a whole lot more with lots of hands. So with that kind of in mind, I decided that when I started to have children, I did not want my children going to public school. I told my wife that after we were married, of course. She about strung me up. And I'll never forget her reaction. And she said, "You're dreaming. That ain't happening." And it took a lot of convincing before she finally decided, well, we'll try homeschool. So my wife did public school at home. Not very successfully. My two older boys totally rebelled at that, and it became fights during school. You know, she would fight them to learn how to read, fight them to write, it was one fight after another all day long, and she absolutely hated it because she was trying to do public school at home. So she finally, she told me that I've had it. You can either do it yourself or you need to find a private school for them. So we started looking at other private schools. Because with what I had learned, I wanted to be able to have a school that did what I wanted it to do. So I started consulting for these schools, trying to change them. And my wife, I would come home and I would say, they won't do this, they won't do that. And finally, after 4 years, she got really tired of that. She said, will you stop whining about it? If you're not happy with these guys, you've started plenty of businesses, go start one yourself. So in 1999, we put together our first private school. And not having actually put a private school together before, I did a lot of things that I would consider to be mistakes, but I learned from those. I had some incredible successes. And I learned the value of creating the excitement for learning in a student. When you can create that excitement in a student, that's when powerful things happen. And I learned that discipline is totally different than what we think of today. And let me give you an example. We had a student named Troy. Troy came to us in the middle of the school year. He had been kicked out of 5 schools before he got to our school. So he was a problem kid. At least that's what everybody thought. Well, I looked at Troy. He didn't look like a problem kid to me. He looked like a pretty good kid. I said, okay, we'll accept him. By the middle of the second week, one of my teachers came flying out of the classroom, running down the hall. Quin, you have got to come get Troy out of my classroom right now. I don't get too excited about things, so I said, well, what'd he do? He's lighting paper on fire under his desk. So I go over there and I get Troy. Now I want to say one thing about our school. I believe that if you don't have God involved in a school, you're failing your student. In my school, we teach by the Spirit, or we don't teach. And I have to live by that too. And so I have Troy walking down the hallway. Now, it's kind of hard to have the Spirit when he's lighting paper on fire under his desk. It makes you want to just grab him by the neck and just, knock some sense into him. So the whole way down the hallway, I'm saying, Lord, I need some help. How do I deal with Troy? We get all the way down to my office. Lord, anytime, that would be a good time to get some help here. I sit him down and I sit down and I'm starting to panic a little bit. Lord, I've got to have some help. And then it came to me. And I asked Troy, who are you? And he looked at me really funny. He was expecting me to start chewing him out and treating him like everybody else had done. And he had this total confused and almost dazed look on his face. And he finally said, my name's Troy. And I said, well, yes it is, but who are you? And he was still really tentative. He said, I'm a person. I said, yes you are, but who are you? I'm a human being. And I said, Troy, you're all of those things, but who are you really? He said, well, I know what you want me to say. I said, well, what's that? And he said, that I'm a child of God. And I said, are you? And he said, I don't know. So for the next 20 minutes, we talked about who Troy is. That number one, he's a son of God. That he has a tremendous heritage. That he has unlimited potential. That he has all of these amazing qualities. That he's super talented. That kid for the next 2 weeks was perfect in our school. Not one problem. I had to remind him gently who he was again, and he was great through the end of the year. It's a valuable lesson I learned that day. As individuals, when we forget who we are, that's when we start to act up. In every case, behavior always straightens up before academics start to improve, especially in our school. So we work with behavior. In our school, we do a devotional every morning, and we talk about principles that empower students, that help them in their lives. We talk about God. We pray. We say the Pledge of Allegiance. We do those things that can help them make a difference in their own lives. They have to believe it. It doesn't help that I believe it about them. They have to believe it about themselves. That sometimes is the biggest challenge, is creating an environment where they can actually believe that they're of value. Another student, I'll tell another story. I love stories if you don't know. This other student that we had that came to us, her name was Brittany. Now Brittany, when she came to us, she was all dressed in black, painted her face white, colored her hair black. She made it very clear she did not want to be at our school. She was only there because her parents forced her to. So when she came into our school, she would sit in the back of the room, put her head on the desk, and basically sleep through every class. You know, my teachers, it drove them nuts. Because, you know, everybody wants to teach the way they were taught, and they want students to respond back to them. It's a funny thing. If they're not responding, it's hard to know if you're teaching the right thing. Well, Brittany didn't respond to anybody. She'd walk into the school and you'd say, "Hi, Brittany." Huh. That was about all you get out of her. You know, I thought, normally there's an adjustment period when somebody comes from public school into a school like ours where they have freedom to decide to learn. And at that time, with my first school, most of my student body were homeschool kids, and it created a really unique environment because these kids were excited to learn. So she was the minority in our school. And I thought, you know, 2 or 3 weeks, she should snap out of it and she should join the other kids and start learning. A month went by, no change. 2 months went by, no change. 3 months, and I'm wondering what's wrong with us. Until one day, it was a Monday morning, in walks this girl, and I had to do a double take to see who it was because she had a flowery dress on, brown hair, and it was Brittany. In the next 30 days, Brittany went from doing absolutely nothing in our class to she became the very best student in our whole school in 30 days. It was because she chose to. When a student chooses to learn, get out of their way. That's the most important thing that we can do as parents, as teachers, as administrators, is to help a student make that choice. If we can't help the students make that choice, we need to change what we're doing. A different tactic, maybe. Sometimes it helps to find out what that student's interest is. Help that student find something that is of interest to them. We have a student right now. In fact, I'll show you a video in a few minutes of him, or actually of his father. This particular student, a year ago, in middle school, he was threatening suicide. He was cutting himself. He was a total mess. After 1 month in our school, now I have to tell you this student is by no means perfect yet, but after 1 month, he came home to his parents, and for the first time in a couple of years, he gave them both a hug and told them he loved them. What a powerful behavioral change. Academically, he's still not doing very much, but behaviors are starting to change. When you can see students and children start to change their behaviors, you know you're on the right track. If a student can read and write, their behavior is the number one thing that they need to correct in order to be successful in life. You know, everybody likes to see their children move on and move ahead, graduate from high school, graduate from college, get a degree. But in reality, for me, there's only one degree that's important. 98.6. As long as I have that degree, I can do anything. When that degree changes, then stay away from me. It's so important that we help empower our children. The youth of today, I think, are smarter. They're faster at picking things up than any of us were. They can truly explode as they are given opportunities. And I think many times we hold them back because of our preconceived ideas on what they should be learning and how they should be learning it. Agency-based education. It's what we believe in at our school. We want our students to be able to increase their knowledge as quickly as they choose to. It's a total different mindset. Many of our students in our current school down in St. George, the majority of our students, I should say, have all come out of public school. They had parents that decided that this Common Core issue wasn't for their kids. And so they put them in our school. And what's interesting is these kids, it reminds me of reading about the children of Israel coming out of bondage. Many of these children are just like that. They're still stuck in the bondage. They still want somebody to force them to pick up that pencil, force them to turn an assignment in, force them to learn. But the minute that we do that, it destroys everything that we're trying to accomplish. They might as well stay in public school. Let me get back to John Dewey for a minute. John Dewey, with his system, he had a number of goals that they wanted to accomplish. In the year 2000, the NEA came out. The NEA happens to be the remainder of that organization that John Dewey initially set up. They came out in the year 2000 and said, we have accomplished all of our goals as set forth by our founders. And people thought that was great. You know, yeah, rah, rah. Except those of us that understood what some of those goals were. Among those goals, They wanted 80% of the students to graduate from high school doing what they're told when they're told to do it. Basically, the robots of society. That's 80% of us. We've all graduated there. We graduated with the ability to do what we're told when we're told to do it. Fortunately, we have an opportunity to think on our own still, or we wouldn't be here. 17% of those students, they wanted, among those goals, they wanted those people to drop out, completely drop out of high school so they could perform the menial tasks of society. Do you know the high school dropouts in America account for about 95% of the crime? It's a pretty scary statistic when you start looking at it. They wanted 3% of our students to be able to think and act and do. And so the curriculum that John Dewey and his cohorts put together was designed for that 3% so that they could excel. And the rest could be the mindless robots that we find in factories that employers just dread, because they'll come and they'll say, okay, John, I want you to do this job, and he'll go away and John will do the job and he'll be done in 15 minutes and he'll come back in an hour. John, what are you doing? Nothing. He's waiting to be told what to do next. How many of us are just like that? How many of us know people just like that? We can't blame those people. It's the school system that has done that to us. It's time for us to change that. We can only change that when we choose to change that, when we start to think, when we awake to the awful situation that we find ourselves in. You know, we don't read the Constitution. We don't read those things that will empower us and lift us. If we don't read them, why will our students read them? Students follow us by example. When we're excited, that rubs off. How many of you got excited about the Constitution when Lloyd was up here? I did. And I've read it several times. But when somebody's excited about something, it rubs off. So the awesome teachers that we have in our school system, they're the ones that have made the difference. Without them, we would have all been doomed. But those awesome teachers that we've all had, they're the ones that have made that difference. And it doesn't matter whether they're in public school or in private school or they're our parents. It's those people that are saving us. So it's so important that we become that. Is my time almost up? Well, let me show this video. It takes 4 minutes. Do I have 4 minutes? So we'll do that, and then I'll open up for some questions.
No one would intentionally drop their child off in the middle of nowhere unprepared. Yet, every day, parents send their children into the unknown of the public classroom. Their hope is their children will learn the tools to become a successful adult. But are they? Parents are finding it harder to find a classroom where their children can be taught to succeed, not simply follow rules. Providence Academy is an all-inclusive kindergarten through 12th grade private school located in St. George, Utah. prepare the children to learn, every day school begins with a prayer, the Pledge of Allegiance, and a devotional thought.
When I heard that there was going to be prayer, they would be studying scriptures, a part of school, being in school, it sure did melt my heart to know that there would be a sweet spirit there to influence children to do good instead of not know what to do.
I really love Providence because everybody is so nice here, and I've learned a lot more than I have in other schools, and I'm able to feel a very strong spirit, and I love it.
And the children are learning, not just the basics, but critical and creative thinking skills. They're allowed to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes, and how to become leaders.
I know, I just feel happier here than I do at public schools because I don't get bullied as much here. I really don't get bullied here, but at public schools I did a lot, so it just makes me feel better.
When my son was born, I could see this light within him. But when he went to middle school in sixth grade, I saw that light just starting to dim, and by seventh grade it was completely gone. So, as you can see, I'm overwhelmed with the emotion because, I've seen a change in my son. My son has made a big change, from where he was hating everything and everyone last year. Now he is loving everyone, giving us a hug every morning and every evening and telling us he loves us. That's a huge change. And so we think that a big part of that change has been the influence of the school.
So the changes that I've seen in my children since they've started at Providence Academy has been getting up in the morning and my child is in the shower before I am. And when I see this in my child, the first word that comes to my mind is success.
Enrolling children in Providence Academy gives them the necessary skills to be tomorrow's leaders. You're not dropping them off unprepared when you give them an education for a lifetime at Providence Academy.
We love Providence Academy!
For more information about Providence Academy or to make a donation, please call 435-674-5555.
One of the things that we want to do with our school is as we put all these programs together, we want to be able to franchise this so we can help lots and lots of students. We want to make it easy. It is very difficult to start a school because I've done it twice and we've worked through a lot of the bugs. There's a lot of issues when you start a school. So we are putting together a program, and we're not ready yet to franchise or to offer franchises, but we're getting there. And that's something that we want to do to help, to be able to create a widespread agency-based educational what's the word I want now? My mind just went blank on the word. A movement. We want to help be part of a movement so that our youth have a place to go. Our youth are going to be our future leaders. We want them empowered. And we're happy to work with anybody, and we're willing to do whatever we can to help in any circumstance. So if you have a school, we're willing to work with other schools too. So I appreciate your time here this afternoon. Thank you very much.